I can't stand him. That's what Kevin Sheedy supposedly said about 8 young AFL players, turning one of football's greatest youth developers into a headline villain. The man who built the baby bombers, who waved jackets for teenagers, who invented aliens to protect rookies from criticism, suddenly hating a list of newbies? It sounds out of bounds, completely wrong. And here's the twist that'll make you question everything you think you know about footy folklore. The list probably never existed. The 8 names, the hate, the whole controversy might be a myth built from satirical radio jokes, a brutal grand final decision, and possibly the wrong Kevin Sheedy entirely. Did the architect of chaos really turn on the kids he spent decades protecting? Or did we all fall for the greatest deflection of his career? The answer reveals more about how football legends get twisted into myths than it does about Sheedy himself. Before we unravel this tangled mess of Martians and marshmallows, do me a favor, hit that hype feature right now and hype this video. It helps more people discover the truth behind these wild footy stories. And honestly, this one's too good to keep to yourself. Seriously, hype it up. Let's start with what Kevin Sheedy actually can't stand today, because understanding modern Sheedy unlocks the whole puzzle. In recent years, he's become football's grumpy grandpa, complaining about the game he helped build. But scratch the surface and you'll see the complaints aren't random old man yelling. They're surgical strikes at what he believes is destroying the sport's soul. He can't stand how modern players are nursed along by specialist coaches, psychologists, and endless support systems. He calls them crutches, comparing today's pathway to the jungle warfare of the 70s and 80s where players developed resilience organically or died trying. He can't stand the stand rule and over-officiating that's turned footy into a static, controlled game instead of the chaotic one-on-one warfare he grew up in. Most tellingly, he can't stand that media training has turned players into robots, homogenized personalities afraid to be characters, afraid to be themselves. The irony cuts deep because Sheedy himself pioneered media protection strategies that created this problem. He acts like a grumpy football grandpa, sure, but there's a plan behind it. There's always a plan with Sheedy. To understand why the idea of him hating newbies feels so wrong, you need to know who Kevin Sheedy really is in this story. They call him the architect of chaos, and that title fits perfectly. Over nearly 3 decades at Essendon and then launching GWS into hostile territory, he redefined what coaching could be. Tactical genius, absolutely. But his real weapon was media manipulation. The jacket waving, the windsock tying, the Martians, these weren't random theatrics from a madman. They were calculated components of a sophisticated management philosophy designed to insulate young players from the crushing weight of professional expectation. He knew how to make himself the headline so his players didn't have to be. Great for protection, maybe, but also classic Sheedy manipulation. He turned himself into a circus, and while everyone watched the ringmaster, his kids learned to fly on the trapeze without cameras tracking their every mistake. Brilliant? Yes. Honest? Not even close. Every outburst, every bizarre comment, every piece of theatre served a purpose, distracting the media wolves while his young players made the mistakes they needed to make to grow into champions. The proof that Sheedy didn't hate newbies lives in 1993, the year he weaponized innocence and changed football forever. After the heartbreak of losing the 1990 grand final to Collingwood and stumbling through a mediocre 1992, conventional wisdom said Essendon needed stability, veterans, experience. Sheedy looked at that conventional wisdom and set it on fire. He identified that the scar tissue of past failures lived in the veterans, not the club itself. So he initiated a purge. Out went the established talent. In came the baby bombers, a cohort of teenagers and 20-year-olds who would rewrite the rulebook. These weren't just young players filling roster spots. They were tactical disruptors in an era dominated by West Coast's and Hawthorn's defensive structures and physical intimidation. Sheedy's newbies lacked the body mass for those battles, so they relied on speed, daring, and something even more dangerous, ignorance of the consequences of failure. Let me walk you through the core group, the kids Sheedy backed when everyone else called him crazy. Number 6 on this list of players he supposedly couldn't stand but actually loved fiercely. Gavin Wanganeen, 20 years old, playing back pocket. Sheedy used him as an attacking defender, and Wanganeen redefined the position so completely he won the Brownlow medal as a newbie. Number 5, Ricky Olaran-Shaw, 20, on the wing. Pure speed, a line breaker Sheedy deployed to shatter defensive zones through pace alone. Number 4, Joe Masidi, 19, in the midfield. He provided the grunt usually reserved for grizzled veterans, proving youth could bring physicality when it mattered. Number 3, Mark Mercuri, 19, midfield and forward. Elite disposal, the class Sheedy used to bypass physical midfield contests entirely. Number 2, Dustin Fletcher, 18 years old, fullback. He played while still attending high school, and Sheedy shielded him from adult pressure by treating him like the kid he was. Number 1, James Hird, 20, at half forward. The creative fulcrum of everything. Sheedy protected him from media scrutiny and let him play with complete freedom, building the foundation for one of the greatest careers in AFL history. These are the players Sheedy loved, nurtured, protected. The idea that he turned around and created a hate list of newbies doesn't just contradict his methods, it contradicts his entire identity. The jacket-waving moment from round 16, 1993, shows you exactly how far Sheedy would go to protect his kids. After Paul Salmon kicked a match-winning goal in the dying seconds against West Coast, Sheedy sprinted from the coach's box, waving his jacket above his head like a lasso, running along the boundary line in pure chaos. Everyone remembers it as an outburst of joy. And maybe it was partly that, but think deeper. The match had been high pressure, chaotic, a game where his young team nearly capitulated against the reigning premiers. His teenagers had made nervous errors that could have been dissected and destroyed in the media. So Sheedy turned himself into a spectacle, ensuring every headline the next day screamed Sheedy the Madman instead of analysing his players' mistakes. He debased himself so they could absorb the experience without absorbing the criticism. That's protection, sure, but it's also manipulation of the highest order. Which brings us to The Martians, Sheedy's masterpiece of linguistic warfare. In the 90s and early 2000s, the AFL cracked down hard on coaches criticising umpiring, imposing massive fines. Sheedy refused to cede the psychological battleground, but he also wasn't stupid enough to drain the club's bank account. So he invented a proxy enemy, extraterrestrials, controlling the game from space. His exact words were gold. You could never ever be fined when you're talking about Martians. Everybody knows that things happen in footy that are unearthly and not fair. Only a Martian could pay some of those decisions. The brilliance was twofold. First, the AFL tribunal couldn't technically fine him for discussing science fiction scenarios. Second, when a newbie gave away a critical free kick, Sheedy could blame Martian intervention instead of lack of discipline, preserving the young player's confidence. Funny? Absolutely. Also a dodge, a loophole, a way to avoid accountability while looking like a lovable eccentric. Now here's where the 8 newbies story likely comes from, and it's not what you think. During the height of the Martian era, Sheedy created or inspired satirical lists, often numbering 8 or 10 points, blaming external cosmic forces for losses. The Could Have Been Champions, a radio comedy troupe, published these Sheedy lists, and one surviving transcript details the list of 8 weights. It's critical because it names specific players in a negative context, which could easily be misremembered decades later as players he can't stand. Let me break down that satirical list. Weight of expectations blamed on the Dons players' expectations. Weight of coaching panel, the 100-member panel causing structural damage. Weight of shot, blaming Scott Lucas, a young player at the time, for having no weight on his right foot. Weight of responsibility, claiming it weighed down James Hird so badly he couldn't play. Weight watchers, the team had one too many. Weight of numbers, accusing the Bulldogs of having more than 18 players through Martian intervention. Weighty matters like gambling sponsorships, distracting everyone. The cash rolling around in pockets. Notice what happened there? In this satirical context, Sheedy names young stars like Scott Lucas and James Hird as problems. But the tone is ironic, mocking, facetious. He's making fun of the media's need to analyse everything, to find someone to blame. If you heard this list 20 years ago and only half remembered it, you might think Sheedy genuinely blamed 8 players. You might think he hated them, but you'd be wrong. The list was theatre, deflection, a joke designed to avoid analysing actual performance while appearing to provide analysis. Here's where Sheedy's protection had limits, and where the ruthless side comes out. Derek Kickett had played every single game of the 1993 season. He was a cult hero, known for flair and skill, beloved by fans. Then, on the eve of the grand final against Carlton, Sheedy dropped him. Just cut him from the biggest game of the year. The rationale Sheedy gave was clinical. Kickett looked tired and leg-weary, wasn't training hard enough. Sheedy replaced him with Dean Wallace and selected more baby bombers, believing that to beat a powerhouse like Carlton, he needed manic youthful pressure combined with grim physicality, not the loose flair of a veteran drifting out of form. Kickett's reaction was absolute. He left the club immediately and refused to speak to Sheedy for 25 years. 25 years of silence, of bitterness, of a relationship destroyed by one selection call. They finally met in 2018 on the Mangrook Footy show, and the reconciliation was described as confrontational, but ultimately resolved. This is what it's like when Sheedy decides you're expendable. This is the human cost of his youth policy. He didn't hate Kickett personally, but he couldn't stand a player who drifted out of form at the critical moment, regardless of their status or history. His loyalty was to the premiership window, not the individual. The present was expendable. The future, those newbies, they were everything. Fast forward to Sheedy's time at GWS, and his definition of can't stand shifts to the cowardice of other clubs' recruiters. After taking over an expansion team filled with literal teenagers, he called them infantile following a 135-point loss to Adelaide. But that wasn't criticism of character. It was a biological fact he used to defend them against unrealistic expectations. Behind the scenes, though, Sheedy was furious because he needed experienced bodies to protect his infants. This led to the recruitment wars, high-stakes trade negotiations using the GWS mini draft picks, incentives allowing other clubs to draft 17-year-olds like Jaeger O'Meara and Jack Martin. Here's where Sheedy's real hate list emerges, and it's not about players, it's about clubs. He offered access to generational teen talents, O'Meara and Martin, to the big Victorian clubs, asking for established stars like Dale Thomas from Collingwood, Matthew Kreuzer from Carlton, Jake Carlisle from Essendon in exchange. The clubs refused to trade their veterans for teenagers. Sheedy's response was scorched earth. He accused them of lacking guts, predicted they would suffer a severe penalty for their conservatism. When he names these newbies, O'Meara and Martin, he's doing it to shame the other clubs. He can't stand the fact that the industry preferred mediocrity over potential. He didn't just coach footy, he picked fights for headlines, for leverage, for psychological warfare. Now here's the twist that changes everything. There's strong evidence that 8 newbies he can't stand story might not even be about AFL Sheedy at all. In early 2023, Kevin Sheedy, the Everton Football Club legend, made headlines criticising manager Frank Lampard's recruitment strategy. Fan discussions and articles referenced Kevin and Frank messed up, and Lampard has brought in 8 players. I can't stand this man. Both men are named Kevin Sheedy. Both are left-footed legends. Both are known for grumpy, forthright media commentary. The Everton Sheedy criticised a specific intake of roughly 8 transfer signings who failed to perform, leading to relegation threats, and the phrase "can't stand" appeared repeatedly in that context. It's highly likely someone encountered a headline about Sheedy slamming 8 new signings, naturally assumed it referred to the AFL coach given his Martian eccentricities, and the myth took root. Within the AFL domain, Sheedy never released a hate list of 8 specific rookies. The closest equivalent is that satirical 8 weights list, and even that was a joke. So let's bring this all together, because the pieces fit perfectly once you see the full picture. The Martians gave Sheedy cover to criticise umpires and protect players. The satirical lists, including the 8 weights, created a false memory of him naming newbies he hated, when really he was mocking the media. The kick-it fallout proves he was ruthless with individuals, but that ruthlessness targeted veterans blocking his youth movement, not the youth themselves. The GWS recruitment wars show his ire aimed at conservative recruiters and clubs lacking guts, not at the talented teenagers they refuse to trade for. And the Everton conflation explains where the 8 newbies phrase probably originated. A mix-up between 2 Kevin Sheedys in 2 different football codes. The conclusion is clear and supported by every piece of evidence. Kevin Sheedy never published a genuine list of 8 AFL newbies he hated. The satirical source, those Martian-era comedy lists, created the number 8 and the negative framing. But it was ironic, not literal. The evidence adds another layer of confusion, cross-contaminating football discourse with a Premier League controversy. Sheedy's real targets were always AFL administrators, the Martians controlling the game, conservative recruiters too scared to back youth, and veterans who lost their hunger and blocked the path for newbies to shine. Sheedy didn't hate newbies, he loved them with a ferocious, protective intensity that bordered on obsession. He loved them enough to wave jackets and make himself look ridiculous so they could play without fear. He loved them enough to invent aliens to shield them from criticism. He loved them enough to destroy the careers of club legends like Derek Kickett when those legends stood in the way of premiership windows. The Martians were never the enemies of the game. They were the guardians of the baby bombers, imaginary villains created so real kids could become real champions. Even the Kickett reconciliation after 25 years tells you something important. Once the premiership was won, once the careers were over, the hate evaporated. What remained was shared history, mutual respect earned through battle. Any list of 8 newbies he can't stand would likely be revised by Sheedy today into a list of 8 players I pushed too hard, 8 kids I protected too fiercely, 8 futures I valued more than the present. The mythology of Kevin Sheedy, the chaos, the mind games, the ruthless calls, it all served one purpose: clearing space for young players to develop without the crushing weight of expectation, destroying them before they could become great. That's his legacy, not a hate list, not 8 names, just an unshakable belief that newbies, given the right protection and the right pressure, could change the game forever. And he was right. The Baby Bombers proved it. The 1993 Premiership validated every crazy decision, every media circus, every Martian excuse. When those kids lifted the cup, Sheedy's methods were vindicated, his protection justified, his vision complete. If this deep dive into footy mythology got you thinking, hit that like button, subscribe for more investigations into the stories behind the headlines, and drop a comment telling me which AFL legend's controversial moment you want explained next. Because in footy, just like with Sheedy's Martians, the truth is always stranger than the myth.